All right, today we're going to talk about the history of Haiti after the Haitian Revolution in the early 1800s and the effect that Haiti will have on the development of other Latin American nations, especially in the Caribbean. And the other big country that we're going to talk about today in the 1800s is Cuba and its results of the post Latin American revolutions and the effect that it'll have on other Caribbean nations. And they largely kind of follow other Latin American developments that we've talked about so far in the continents themselves. So we're going to divide the Haitian Revolution into really two different phases. Number one, the revolutionary era that starts in the 1780s and goes to 1804, and then Haiti after the revolution, going through the rest of the 1800s, and then we'll get into Cuba after 1830, 1820s, 1830. So we'll start with Haiti, where it is on the map, really. Uh, Present day Haiti started off as a French colony called Saint Domingue. And you see on the map here, it's in kind of the middle of the Caribbean Sea, the Caribbean kind of region. And Saint Domingue, we should remember, is only the western half of that island. So the island was originally so-called discovered by the Spanish in the kind of Christopher Columbus era in the late 1400s, and was very quickly colonized by the Spanish, and they call the whole island Santo Domingo. And when the French took over the western half of the island as a colony, they basically just turned it into the French-sounding version of that by calling it Saint Domingue. And you see France is on the eastern part of the Atlantic, the northeastern Atlantic, where Europe is. So France was one of the major colonial powers in the 16 and 1700s, and Saint Domingue was an extraordinarily important colony. Was known as one of the wealthiest colonies all over the world that any European country owned by the 1700s. So by the 1780s, it's so valuable. It's exporting more value. It's exporting more crops that have a higher monetary value, just money value, than all of the United States. So all 13 was to be British colonies that created the United States in the 1780s. Their economy, their export size, is not the size of the western half of this little island. So Saint Domingue is an extraordinarily wealthy colony and brings great value to France itself. And historians have estimated that one third of all the French Empire's exports all over the world come from Saint Domingue in terms of money value. So it was an extremely wealthy and extremely important colony to France, and really any country that would be able to take over the colony would benefit from that wealth also. So Saint Domingue was also a target for other imperial nations like Britain or even eventually the United States to take control over. Saint Domingue's population was pretty extraordinary for the time in several different ways. Historians have estimated by the late 1780s, when these kind of revolutionary movements will get going, starting in France, that Saint Domingue, the colony, had a population of about 550,000. About 500,000 of them are slaves, so the massive amount of the population, about 90% of the human population of the colony, were enslaved. About 32,000 of them were European colonists, and about 24,000 were what we call mulattoes, basically mixed-race individuals who could claim both European and African ancestry. And one of the other things that made Saint Domingue so different from a lot of other colonies, both British and French and other European colonies around the world, is they had a very large and prosperous mulatto landowning class, became known as the gens de couleur. So the gens de couleur were often former slaves themselves who had escaped slavery or had bought their way out of slavery, which was possible in the French Empire at the time. Somehow they or had been released from slavery, but one way or the other had been had been enslaved before in their younger lives and had somehow gotten out of slavery and had worked for money, as many former slaves could in different European empires. They could go get jobs as general wage laborers, and if they saved their money, they might be able to buy some land. And the gens de couleur had done that. They had bought land, and some of them were very wealthy landowners who even owned many slaves themselves. So the gens de couleur are a very prosperous kind of mulatto group of often former slaves that largely does not exist to that extent of wealth and power in the colony in other European colonies. So the gens de couleur's existence and their status and their power and wealth and prosperity in the colony really made the colony very different from a lot of the other European colonies of the time that used slavery. The gens de couleur, their basic long-term grievance against the colony is that even though they are free citizens of the colony, they're also very heavily discriminated against because of their racial background. So the European colonists very much looked down on the gens de couleur, even though some of the gens were just as wealthy as some of the European colonists. They were mistreated in society. They were looked down upon and kind of kept at a distance from, say, European parties and politics and stuff like that. So the gens de couleur, even though they're wealthy and prosperous, they also feel like they are outsiders within the colony, that they're kept out of political power, and so they carry that kind of anger against the Europeans. And their goal is often just to eliminate the race-based discrimination within the colony itself. So that's what Saint-Domingue kind of looks like, just as a sketch, very quick sketch, by the 1780s, when revolutionary sentiment starts to very much grow. And it really starts off in France in 1789. 1789 is a big year for European historians because that's the year that the French Revolution started. We don't have time to go into the major background of why the French Revolution started and how it's got going and all those things. But basically, in spring of 1789, the French king was forced to call up the representatives of the French nation to solve a fiscal crisis. The French monarchy was going bankrupt, and the last-ditch attempt to raise taxes was basically to call up the nation's representatives and hold a special meeting with the king and his people and try to get some kind of tax reform law passed that would be acceptable to the whole nation, to kind of end the fiscal crisis and try to kind of put the French government's finances back on its feet. So that's what starts just the kind of meeting, and in those meetings in spring of 1789, the people who represent the general French population, estimated like 98% of the population, basically say, if we're going to pass a new tax reform law that will save the French monarchy from bankruptcy, then we're going to want something in return. And their demands pretty much start at kind of equality and freedom, and they grow and grow and grow to the point where they want a written constitution. And this starts off the revolution, where the kind of representatives of the people want more democracy and a written constitution to limit government power, and the king and the elites kind of try to stand up against that. And so that's what the French Revolution generally is. And it starts in spring of 1789 with these meetings. And this is important for Saint-Domingue because the Estates General did not officially invite representatives from Saint-Domingue to travel to France to kind of voice the opinion of the colonists on the island. But the colonists sent their own anyway. They sent their own delegation by choice to the Estates General, even though they had not been invited. And the leader of this colony is a person from the gens de couleur named Vincent Auger. So his delegation arrived in France, and he really pushes the French government during these meetings to take some kind of stance on racial discrimination in the island, or perhaps even a stance about ending slavery, since the revolutionaries start talking about freedom and equality and everything, and Auger is there to remind them, well, it's hard to talk about freedom and equality when you're still enforcing slavery in your colonies. So that was very embarrassing to the French Revolution, and they tried to kind of push Auger and his people away and kind of keep them out of the meetings because it was such an embarrassment, these ideas that Auger was talking about. So Auger and his people get so angry through the summer of 1789 and as the year turns into 1790 that they basically choose to leave the Estates General and come back home to the island because they figure that the French Revolution isn't doing much for them. So Auger comes back in about summer of 1790 and recruits about 300 or so of the leading gens de couleur to start a rebellion in the fall of 1790, basically demanding an end to racial discrimination on the island. So this will be a rebellion of the gens de couleur against the white colonists, the white French colonists who basically run the island, or run their half of the island, who run the colony. So it's a small-scale rebellion that's really just trying to force the white French colonial leaders to end this racial discrimination problem. Remember, the gens de couleur are not advocating the end of slavery, largely because they own slaves themselves. They are big landowners also. So this rebellion is kind of a rebellion of the mulatto elite landowners against the white elite landowners. And that's really all it is at first. Auger's rebellion failed, and he was captured and grossly and publicly executed. So that was such an embarrassment to the French government in France itself, this revolutionary government that's now taken power, that they offer full equality to the gens de couleur in May 1791. So Auger is dead by that point, but he is seen as a kind of martyr to the cause. And the French government responds by saying, yes, we were wrong to deny them real equality, and they take the step of offering real equality to the gens de couleur. The problem, though, is that the French government's decision really angers the white colonists, who don't want to give full equality to the gens de couleur. So now the white colonial leaders start talking about revolution themselves, which is basically declaring independence for the colony and breaking away from France and becoming their own government, their own little country, specifically to stop the gens de couleur from gaining real equality. So that shows us how deeply held these racial sentiments are, these racist ideas, especially amongst the white colonial elite. They are willing to break away from their own long-term country in order to deny the gens de couleur any real sense of equality or pride or equal access to power or anything like that. So this starts off a whole new gens de couleur rebellion in the southern parts of the island, where they tend to have much of the land and power. So this becomes a kind of new uprising amongst the gens de couleur and a much kind of bloodier war that they're going to try to fight against the white elite. At the same time, a completely different slave uprising starts in the northern part of the island, largely led by a black general who becomes known as Toussaint Louverture. So this uprising in the northern part is much more violent because it's a fully anti-slavery uprising. It's an uprising of slaves who promote Louverture as their leader, and who was a former slave himself and who had some military experience, so he knew how to get armies into shape and lead them in the battlefield. And this uprising in the north is far more violent because they're not just looking to make a deal with the white elite. They want to destroy the white elite, completely end slavery, and they don't even really like the gens de couleur because they view them as just some other oppressor. So Louverture's revolution that starts in August 1791 goes from plantation to plantation, killing the landowners very often if they refuse to leave, burning the plantation, and causing just massive destruction. And this is what you get when the elites that run a certain area refuse to make any deals about slavery. If they try to hold on to slavery, they're often attacked as oppressors, and they're often destroyed. And we have to remember that slaves were 90% of the population of this colony. So once a slave uprising grows and becomes fairly successful, slaves who hear about it want to join it because they want revenge. And the white elite are in a very bad position at this point. And so there's basically two different civil wars going on the island. One between the gens de couleur and the white elite, and the other between this massive anti-slavery uprising in the north versus all of the elite. And these wars go on for years, and they're mostly, the most violent of them are in the north again. So the northern ones kill hundreds, if not thousands, of French white elite landowners. And Louverture is winning in the north and gaining more and more territory under his control, under his army's control. To the point where in the mid-1790s, France, the revolutionaries in France realize that this is a catastrophe, and they send a new kind of administrator for the island to try to put things back under control and end these conflicts and whatnot. And this new French governor figured that the best way to stop this warfare is to bring Louverture into the government and really make him into the head of all of the colony's armies. And Louverture accepts that, basically as almost like a vice general, really, of the island, of the colony. And the new French administrator is basically the head general of the thing. So Louverture is basically the second in command of the colony, the colonial government. And Louverture uses that to basically arrest the higher up guy, the official governor, arrest him in the middle of the night one night, throw him in jail on some trumped up charges, and then kick him out of the colony. So they put him on a boat and sent the guy back to France, and that's how Louverture takes over the whole colony. So he is the colonial government at this point. And he has a lot of decisions to make about how he's going to run the colony. The problem is that there's immediately going to be more wars because the French elite obviously don't like that he's done this. So there's going to be other conflicts that get going. Louverture took over the colony in late 1797, if I remember correctly. And at that point, there's some negotiations about some kind of future avoidance of conflict, and let's avoid a war, and how we got to figure out who's going to run the government. But those negotiations break down. So there's another major war that gets going in 1799 that becomes known in Haitian history as the War of the South, where basically Louverture had defeated the white elites and takes the fight to the gens de couleur to destroy them as any kind of threat to him. So that war goes on for about a year. And during these years that Louverture is in power, he has to figure out how to keep the economy going. So his solution is to create a kind of forced labor system where he officially says basically that slavery is over, but he says that any able-bodied adult male who does not join the army in order to fight off any French forces or any gens de couleur to end slavery and guarantee that it ends. If you don't want to join the army, he says that you're going to be forced to work on the plantations again. He says that you'll be paid for it. You'll get a share of the revenue from that plantation. But a lot of the average black workforce looks at this as very hypocritical. You can either fight to end slavery, or basically you will be re-enslaved on one of these plantations to do the work of growing sugar for the most part. So a lot of the black workforce doesn't like this decision in the least. They see it as hypocritical and dictatorial. And Louverture is very much setting himself up as a kind of dictator for life over the colony. And he will declare himself position basically governor for life in May 1801. So Louverture's armies are basically taking over all of the landed plantations, the big estates, throughout the whole colony, piece by piece. He often makes deals with the former white owners to bring them back to their plantation and put them, give their plantation back to them, but with the agreement that they cannot own slaves and that this workforce that they have is basically government employees for the most part. And a lot of the white former owners take the risk and they come back and they go back to their homes and whatnot. And very often they are directing as a kind of manager over the same employees that used to be their slaves before these wars started. So you can imagine how the black workforce felt about that. I mean, they weren't very happy about it at all. They see that as the return of slavery to them. And the thing that really worried a lot of slaves and former slaves, and Louverture himself, is when the French government in the early 1800s starts reinstituting or restoring slavery to other of their Caribbean islands. So the French Empire owns several other Caribbean islands as colonies, and in the early 1800s they start rebuilding slavery in those islands. And once the word of that reaches back to Saint-Domingue, Louverture and others are very worried that the French government is going to try to reinforce slavery on them also. And that fear hits at the same time that a French invasion force arrives on the island and tries to start a new war against Louverture to overthrow him. It doesn't work very well because the black armies under him are so willing to fight to the death to defend the end of slavery for obvious reasons that the French invasion force can't gain much ground. So they eventually, in May of 1802, they meet with Louverture personally and they write up a peace treaty with him. But as he is leaving the meeting, they basically arrest him, take him as prisoner, and they send him back to France to stand trial. A trial never really happens. They basically throw him in a prison cell in France and just leave him to rot until he dies. And he does die in April 1803, so that's the end of Louverture. And a lot of the other black military leaders in Louverture's army and the black soldiers see this combination of they've gotten rid of him, and there's all these rumors of France possibly trying to reinstitute slavery on the island, and that scares a whole lot of them to the point where they're willing to keep fighting even though their leader is now gone. They will find other leaders, but another major giant war breaks out between the black armies in Saint-Domingue and the French invasion force that's trying to reconquer the island, basically. And this becomes known as the War for Independence in Haitian history. And it goes from 1802 to 1803, and it is unbelievably brutal, unbelievably violent. The French forces go basically genocidal in the areas that they control to wipe out any resistance. So they will kill virtually all black or former slave people that they can possibly find in the territories that they control. The black armies use what military historians call a scorched earth policy, which is basically you're fighting battles, and if you feel like you're going to lose the battle and you have to retreat, instead of just retreating and handing over that land to your enemy, you burn down the land as you retreat, so that as your enemy comes in to occupy the area, there's no food left because it's all been burned down to the ground. And that basically will starve the invader to the point where they have to surrender and leave. So the black forces use this scorched earth policy combined with guerrilla warfare, which is basically hit and run military tactics. Instead of meeting the enemy on the battlefield kind of officially and fighting it out, guerrilla warfare is basically you hide in the jungles or wherever you can, and you come out and launch hit and run attacks against vulnerable targets. And once your attack has done the damage that you want, you run back into the jungles or your hiding places and avoid direct conflict with the enemy. So that's what a lot of armies tend to do against an enemy that has an overwhelming force and firepower or numbers or something like that. And the black armies will also use atrocities against the white landowners or any white prisoners they take also. So they are extremely violent against even non-combatants in this war. So the war is unbelievably violent. It is hugely destructive of the whole colony for the most part. And it really keeps going. Neither side can really gain much of an upper hand until the big change is that Napoleon, who is now the leader of the French Empire, the French government in France, he is a kind of megalomaniac who wants to take over the whole world, and his plan for taking over the Americas was to start this new French Empire based and have its capital city in New Orleans, which is way down here south on the map. This Louisiana territory was a French colony at the time. So Napoleon's vision is to start a new French empire in North America with its capital city at New Orleans, and to also have a big power base down in Saint-Domingue. So that's why he kept sending these armies in to reconquer Saint-Domingue and reinstitute slavery. But his wars in Europe aren't really going that well by 1803. So he decides to change his plans and give up on his North American empire. So he decides to sell all of Louisiana to the United States just to get more money to continue fighting in other parts of the world. And he figures, since I'm not going to have this new North American empire based in New Orleans anyway, then what's really the point in still fighting in Saint-Domingue? So he pulls his forces out of there, and that's what really allows the black armies to win and declare independence eventually. So the French armies basically leave Saint-Domingue by the end of 1803, and the black armies are successful, and they declare full independence under their leading general named Jean-Jacques Dessalines. They proclaim their independence on January 1st, 1804. So that's the end of the Revolutionary Wars for Haiti, and they call their new country Haiti. They don't want to call it Saint-Domingue anymore. It sounds too French. So Haiti is the kind of old native cultural term for the island, or at least the western part of the island. So the wars are over. The Haitian Revolution is successful. And the Haitian Revolution has major ripple effects all over the world, and especially in the European world, Europe and the United States and Canada, so basically the Western world. So we'll talk about those kind of major results real quickly. The first one is that is just pretty obvious. The Haitian Revolution is the first, and it's the biggest slave revolt ever to overthrow slavery and build an independent country. And remember, the whole process took 15 years of horrifically bloody warfare. Remember, all this started off in 1789 with the beginning of the French Revolution, and it succeeds with the independence of Haiti in 1804. So that's a lot of fighting and a lot of sacrifice over a long period of time. So immediately, it is the biggest and the most successful slave revolt in all of world history, or at least in modern world history since the 1500s and the kind of the Columbus discovery, so-called, of the New World that links Europe to Africa and the Americas. So this is the biggest slave uprising of black slaves in world history that the Europeans have ever known about, at least. Another major result is that about a third of the pre-revolution population that lived on the island before 1789 either fled or was killed in this 15 years of fighting. So 1/3 of all the people just suddenly gone is just shows you the amount of destruction and fear that spread on the island. Haiti's first revolutionary leaders, including Louverture and Dessalines, who will eventually build his own kind of dictatorship, and another guy we'll talk about in a few minutes, they all used dictatorships on some level or another. And they justified that to keep themselves in power, and they said that they would be the strength for from coming back to the island or to their country. So they use the fight against slavery as an excuse to build up centralized government dictatorships under themselves and keep themselves in power mostly for the rest of their lives. And because they are so obsessed, and the general population is obsessed in Haiti with stopping slavery from ever coming back, that they largely tie the idea of Haitian nationalism, the idea of being Haitian, to race, to having largely African backgrounds. So one example is that they start passing laws saying that whites cannot own land in Haiti. So they might be able to rent land, but they cannot own it outright. They might be able to lease it from the government or something like that. But that shows you the extent to which the government and the general population just do not trust white Europeans, because that memory of slavery is so powerful, and they're so afraid of giving whites any kind of major power that they might use to bring slavery back and reconquer the island. And what we've gone over so far today is really a simplified version of the Haitian Revolution. There were many attempts by different European powers to land armies in Saint-Domingue to reconquer it and bring slavery back and control one of the most valuable colonies in the world. And the Haitian population remembered that. They learned from it. One thing we should really remember with the start of these early rebellions in 1789 to 91 is that the white elites who were in power, who ran the colony when the French Revolution started, they did everything they possibly could to avoid ending slavery. They were willing to fight against the gens de couleur, who didn't even want to end slavery themselves. They just wanted to end discrimination. And once Louverture's revolution gets going, the real anti-slavery revolution gets going, the white elites are so afraid of that, and so afraid of not just losing their land, but losing the slaves that worked the land, their access to wealth, that the white Europeans who were running the colony, they did everything they possibly could to try to figure out how can they keep slavery going as a system. So they considered and tried to stay part of the French Empire, hoping that the French government would help them. When that didn't seem to work out very well, some of the colonial leaders talked about breaking away and becoming an independent country from France. And there's even another instance we didn't talk very much about, but some of the white colonial leaders felt so desperate that they contacted Britain, the British government, and offered to help overthrow their own government on the island and hand over the colony to the British Empire as long as Britain promised to send an army to put down the slave uprising and keep the white landowners in power with slaves. So the white elites were absolutely obsessed with trying to figure out how to keep slavery in existence. And of course, the black anti-slavery rebels did everything they possibly could to figure out how to end slavery. So that's why the fighting became so desperate and so violent. So the black armies, their big goal is to end slavery, and they'll do it by any means possible. They at first tried to do it by staying a French colony when France was willing to outlaw slavery. When Napoleon came to power and starts talking about rebuilding slavery, they'll talk about breaking away from France and becoming an independent country because they don't like the idea of bringing slavery back, and finally actually doing that, becoming an independent country in 1804. So both sides were absolutely obsessed, and they used every resource and every idea they can possibly think of in this fight over slavery. So slavery was the core central cause of these conflicts. And when neither side is willing to give up their demands regarding slavery, they just fight it out to the bitter end. All right, and the last thing to understand is that all the major foreign powers are extremely hostile to Haiti because France doesn't like the image of being having their colony overthrown by anti-slavery armies, by Black Revolution basically, and that idea scared all the other major European powers. Scared Britain because they had slavery all over their empire. Definitely scared the United States because they had slavery still, and slave owners are basically running the United States at that point in the early 1800s. Um, so all major foreign powers that had any real relations with Haiti after the revolution, as we'll see in a little bit, they take steps to try to destroy Haiti because they're so resistant to the idea of any kind of anti-slavery uprising amongst black people, and they're very afraid that the Haitian Revolution's example will teach slaves in their own empires or their own country, like the United States, that it's possible that you can rise up and overthrow slavery and build an independent government, an independent nation, a new country. So all the other major European powers are very afraid of Haiti's example and will start taking steps to try to stop Haiti's existence. And next kind of big section is what happens with Haiti immediately after the revolution and independence is proclaimed in 1804. Jean-Jacques Dessalines is really in charge of the government as the kind of last standing black general. And he took a big decision in the first few months of 1804, which is basically to allow a massacre of any of the white Europeans that are still on the island. This seems extremely brutal, obviously, but many historians remind us that those white people that were left on the island were the ones that largely were there because they wanted to keep their land and try to keep their slaves. So once the massacres start, and it's all over Haiti, it doesn't happen in just one region of the country, it happens all over the place over the first few months of the year. They flee if they can. They leave their property, they run to the coastline, try to get on boats and get out of there before they get killed. And a lot of them didn't make it. A lot of them just killed in the country before they could escape. Dessalines justified this by saying that it would accomplish two things. Number one, it would warn other European nations that you don't want to try to invade this place because this could happen to you also if you come here and try to rebuild slavery. It's just never going to happen here in Haiti again. The population is too ravenously opposed to slavery that this massacre will be a warning to other possible conquerors who might consider the possibility of trying to send an army to Haiti to conquer it and rebuild slavery. And it's just a message that says that's not going to happen ever. It's not possible. Dessalines also said that this would help end any type of possibility of long-term feuds in Haiti, that if you let the white former slave owners stay in the country, that there's going to be this drip over the years of paranoia amongst the black residents that the whites are kind of conspiring to bring back slavery, overthrow the government or something like that. And that there could just be long-term fighting in the streets between former slaves and former slave owners. If they run into each other, could just be violence out there in the street someday. There could be reprisals, there could be murders, and that could go on for generations. So Dessalines also justified this massacre of the remaining white people as just kind of wipe them out now, and then we won't have the problem of those long-term feuds into the future. So he says that it's basically a purging to eliminate the possibility of lawlessness into the future. So let's just do it now and get it out of the way, basically. And it's a pretty brutal policy, but that's how he justified it. Dessalines, fairly quickly, by the end of the first year in October 1804, so about 9 months after he kind of declared Haiti as an independent country, declared independence, named himself as Emperor of Haiti for life. So he calls himself Emperor Jacques I. That doesn't last very long because a lot of the other Haitian people all over the country want to have a democracy of some type. They want to have maybe some voting rights, Congress, maybe a president. So they very much disagree with this move to start a Haitian empire, basically, under a military dictatorship. So many of them start a revolt in October 1806, really 2 years after he had declared himself emperor, and that revolt kills him. So he's out by the end of 1806. And when he is killed, the leadership of the country really kind of devolves into a civil war between two different black generals and their two different armies. One guy is named Henri Christophe, and another is named Alexandre Sabpétion. So there's basically a civil war, and it's a fairly elite civil war. It's between the different officers have choices to make which general you're going to follow in this civil war. But they each raise armies and go after each other. And the Civil War isn't really ever very well resolved, but basically Henri Christophe wins in the northern types of areas, and he tends to control the northern area, and his rival Pétion controls the southern part of Haiti, and they will kind of fight each other again every once in a while, but Henri Christophe calls himself the new king of Haiti in 1811, so he calls himself King Henri I. And Pétion is still in the south, kind of trying to raise a rebellion or raising trouble or something like that. And Pétion will continue doing that for a while, trying to retake control over the whole island, or at least all of Haiti, the western part of the island. And Henri has a big decision to make. He's seen as the kind of formal leader of the actual government of Haiti. The problem, again, is that there's a lot of economic damage that have been done during the wars. And Henri makes the very similar decision that Toussaint Louverture had years before, 15 years before or so. In order to get the economy going back, he needed some amount of stability. So he wanted to get workers back into the sugar plantations. And he basically sent black workers back to work on the sugar plantations for money, but it wasn't a choice for those workers. So those workers look at this as the recreation of slavery, basically. They're not paid very well, and they're forced to do it. So they really turn against Henri after a few years and started rebellion against him that eventually grows to include even his highest and closest and trusted advisors by 1820. So he commits suicide in 1820 in order to escape capture and possible trial and execution and whatnot. Pétion in the south had died in 1818, so the next general in charge of the south was this guy named Jean-Pierre Boyer. And when Henri I kills himself in 1820, there's no clear heirs to his throne. So Boyer basically takes over the whole government at this point and kind of declares himself ruler of reunified Haiti in 1820 after Henri I killed himself. So Boyer will be the leader, and he will call himself president, and he'll be in power for 23 years. But he's not really an elected president. He becomes more of a dictator over time. And one of Boyer's biggest problems that the others had also dealt with before him was that the rest of the world was fairly hostile toward Haiti because, again, they don't like the idea of a black revolutionary force overthrowing slavery and establishing a new country. So on the world map, or at least much of the world, the Atlantic world as historians often call it. So Haiti is just on the western half of this little island in the Caribbean. And a lot of the other major powers look at Haiti as like a major threat to the existence of their whole worldwide empire or their whole country, which seems ridiculous when you just compare the size and wealth and power of Haiti to these others that we're going to talk about. But it wasn't just that Haiti could be a military threat or an economic threat to these other giant countries, these other powers, but it was an intellectual threat. It was a philosophical threat to the French or the British Empire or even the United States. because it was an example to slaves all over the European world that they could also possibly try an anti-slavery revolution, overthrow the slave system, and create a whole new country. So it was, instead of being a real military threat to those countries, it was like the danger of a good example to the people living in those countries, and obviously slaves. So most European and the U.S. government would become extremely hostile toward Haiti and would basically try to ostracize Haiti, um, try to economically cut it off from the rest of the world if they can. Um, and many countries like the United States will try to censor or stop completely any news from Haiti getting into their country and especially spreading amongst their slave populations. So the first one to really talk about is the United States. The United States is very close to Haiti. By 1820, the United States has even taken over Florida. So the United States is absolutely obsessed with keeping any news about Haiti out of the United States, and especially, obviously, the southern slave owners. They do not want their slaves hearing about Haiti's existence at all. And so they try to keep the slave populations in the southern United States completely unaware of Haiti's existence. France also will, it's hard for France to stop people from knowing about Haiti because Haiti was a former French colony. But France takes a different type of step and refuses to even recognize Haiti's existence as a sovereign nation until 1825. So remember, Dessalines had proclaimed Haiti's independence in 1804, and France withholds recognizing that independence for over 20 years, hoping to either destroy Haiti economically or maybe militarily reinvade. But by 1825, France is willing to kind of open negotiations with Haiti over formal recognition, which would mean that France will start trading and buying and selling Haitian goods and whatnot. So that could really help the Haitian economy. But France is only willing to do this if Haiti is willing to agree to $100 million bill, basically a reparations demand that Haiti will have to pay France $100 million over the next 50 or 60 years in order to repay all the damage that the Haitian Revolution had cost France and the French people. And the Haitian government hates this idea because it's humiliating, number one, that you're basically buying recognition. And number two, their economy is not doing that great, so having this giant, basically $2 million bill per year with interest over the next 60 years will do a lot of damage to the Haitian economy. The Haitian government just doesn't have that much cash. But they do eventually agree to it in order to get trade going back again with the French Empire. Because remember, it's not just France way out there in the northeastern Atlantic. France also owns a bunch of islands still as colonies throughout the Caribbean and other parts of Latin America. So Haiti desperately wants to get trade with the French Empire back. So they agree to that in 1825, which does massive long-term damage to Haitians' kind of development and economic growth. That also leaves Britain, which is by the 1820s the dominant world empire. Britain has more colonies in more places around the world than any other country. So Britain is, by the 1820s, the undisputed most powerful country in the world, economically and even militarily. So Haiti really wanted recognition from Britain also because Britain has all these colonies all over the place. Britain didn't want to recognize Haiti because Britain still had slavery in its empire. So Britain does not formally recognize Haiti's existence until 1833, after the British government decided to end slavery in its empire. Not in Britain itself, but throughout all of its colonies. They're going to stop slavery. So once they decide to stop slavery, they figure there's not much problem in recognizing Haiti anymore. But the British government will still exclude Haiti's goods from entering Britain itself for another 10 years until the 1840s. So they still don't want much word or many of Haitian goods entering Britain itself, because Britain itself still has slavery in the British island. And perhaps the United States is the most vicious against Haiti for the long term in refusing to recognize. The United States launches embargoes against Haiti from 1806 to 1810, or 1810. An embargo is really the opposite of a boycott. If a boycott is a refusal to buy things from somebody, an embargo is a refusal to sell things to somebody. So the United States government passed a law in 1806 where it made it illegal for U.S. companies to sell things to Haiti in an attempt to strangle the Haitian economy and destroy Haiti. So that policy was largely led by white Southern slave owners in the United States, people like Thomas Jefferson and his Virginian friends and other Southerners from other U.S. states that had large amounts of slaves in their states. So yeah, the Southern slave owners in the United States have this hardcore anti-Haiti policy for years and years and years. Even when the embargo ends in 1810, they will continue to refuse to recognize Haiti's existence as a sovereign country. And the United States will not recognize Haiti until 1863. So decades and decades after even Britain and France had recognized Haiti. So that's how much hatred and fear the U.S. Southerners have of Haiti, and the Haitian example of an anti-slavery uprising that's successful. And the reason that the United States recognizes Haiti as a formal sovereign country in 1863 is that's in the middle of the U.S. Civil War, where the southern states had seceded and tried to go independent. So when a vote happened about whether or not to recognize Haiti as a formal country, the Southerners were not there for the vote. They had left. So it's only the Northerners, who had already gotten rid of slavery in their northern states and were fighting a war to largely stop slavery, the Civil War. When they get to vote and there's no Southerners around to vote no, they vote yes, and suddenly they formally recognize Haiti in 1863. So that happened quite a lot in U.S. history during the Civil War. All these policies that the Northerners wanted to pass for decades and decades, when the Southerners leave the country, they just start taking votes, and there you go. So that's one reason that the Southerners, once they lose the Civil War in the United States, very much suffer when they try to re-enter the country. They couldn't stop the policies anymore. So that's how Haiti formally gets a lot of independence, but it also gives us a decades-long view of the major powers, the United States, France, and Britain, and their anti-Haiti policies that often go for decades and decades. Haiti has its own foreign policy. Number one is to try to get recognition from all these powerful and wealthy other countries to get trade going and kind of restart their economy, get their economy going again. And their big foreign policy, though, is really to expand their power in the Caribbean. And the first step in that is to try to conquer the rest of the island. So I like this map a lot because it shows the split between the island, that Haiti is only about the western third of the island. And the rest is this other country that had been a Spanish colony up until the Latin American Revolutionary Wars that kind of have their apex around 1820 or so, depending where you are. And the eastern part of the island declared independence from Spain and became its own country and became known as Santo Domingo. And the leaders of Haiti, largely Boyer, after 1820, decide that this is a good opportunity because Santo Domingo is a new country, is just getting off its feet. Boyer decides to launch an invasion and conquer the rest of the island. And Boyer accomplished that, conquered the eastern half, or eastern two-thirds, abolished slavery throughout the whole island, But the Haitian government does take control over the eastern part and confiscated land from former Spanish landowners, confiscated Catholic Church property. So a lot of the Santo Domingo people, even though they're getting rid of slavery in this step, a lot of them really hate the Haitian occupation and still to this day define it as a foreign occupation that was repressive and pretty horrible to them. So that Haitian occupation of the eastern part of the island will last for over 20 years, basically until there's a major kind of Dominican uprising against that occupation that kicks it out in 1844 and creates a newly independent country that becomes known as the Dominican Republic, which still exists today. And Boyer was so humiliated at that loss in that war that he's also forced out of power quickly after the Dominican Republic becomes a country. So another Haitian emperor will come along and try to invade and control the eastern part again, but the Dominican Republic will successfully overthrow that attempt within just a few years. So the Haitian government often has the desire to try to conquer the whole island and make it all part of Haiti, one way or the other. So Boyer is overthrown right around 1843-44, and that starts off a massively unstable era of Haitian politics that goes for decades and decades, all the way through to about 1915, where there's like 20 different rulers in that 70 years. They're almost all come out of the military, and they almost all try to establish some kind of dictatorship. 16 out of the 20 are assassinated, so they don't even live long enough to get their governments kind of solidly in place. So they're either assassinated or overthrown. So only 4 of them kind of serve out a full term as a president or something like that. But it's a very unstable time where there's a lot of rebellions and revolutions in Haiti going into the early 1900s. But getting into what happens with Haiti throughout the rest of the 1890s or 1800s from 1820 to about the 1890s or so, just kind of socially and economically and politically, there starts to be this kind of split between the Haitian population in these different kind of subgroups that we're going to talk about. So the Haitian economy is almost entirely based on what we call cash crops, and the Haitian cash crop is still sugar. They grow it on plantations, they sell it to the rest of the world. It is largely in kind of export-oriented economy. So the Haitian economy is agricultural for the most part, and they take the sugar off the plantations, put it on boats, or sell it to shippers, basically, who will take the sugar and sell it as middlemen to wherever they're going to the rest of the world. So that's largely what the Haitian economy is. But after the 1820s, we start to see a kind of social and economic separation between 2 different major groups, which are basically the elite, the wealthy, French-speaking kind of business class who live in the big cities of Haiti. They start to kind of separate as a class from the rest of the population who work out in the countryside on the plantations, who are largely kind of peasant farmers and mostly speak Creole. So Creole is a kind of French merger with a lot of the Spanish or native languages. So it has some French aspects to it, but not it can sound French-ish, but it's not formal French. So formal French is seen as like the language of educated businessmen in the cities and the wealthy areas, and Creole is seen as the kind of more bastardized French that is a combination with other languages. That's the popular language throughout the rest of the country amongst the kind of manual laborers, basically. So the elite kind of city leaders businessmen who do the buying and selling and exporting. They are often lighter skinned um, Haitians. They're not usually white because the white people have been massacred. Um, so they're more kind of like the je de couleur inheritors. And the common workforce, the manual laborers, are largely darker skinned, have more African associations. So there's also a kind of racial separation going on, or a separation of skin color between these two different groups that kind of reinforces a lot of the economic identity. But out in the countryside where these are, the workforce is working on plantations or they're working on small farms or something like that, the countryside is often dominated by the large landowners. So it's not like the menial kind of manual laborers, the peasant farmers are out there just kind of, for the most part, working on their tiny little plots that their families own. They mostly work on large plantations. That's the big economic power, even out in the countryside, outside of the cities. So the big landowners, even out in the countryside, they tend to dominate that region. So the big landowners tend to economically and politically dominate that, while the businessmen class in the cities tend to dominate those areas. So the general workforce, the general farmers, they don't really have a whole lot of political voice at all. They're paid very little. They don't have much economic power. So in politics, in Haiti, it really comes down to the big landowners out in the countryside that are accumulating wealth for themselves, and the business elite in the cities that are accumulating wealth for themselves. And those are the two groups that will kind of over time vie for power. But even that elite in the cities themselves tend to break down between two different subgroups who eventually will fight each other for kind of power over time and eventually overpower the landowners. So those groups largely split between the urban mulattoes, who mostly support the idea of democracy and are an elite party themselves. They talk about democracy and wanting to have voting rights for everybody, but they very much want to restrict voting rights to only educated people or literate people. So you might have to pass a literacy test to be able to vote in an election. Because they said that only the most qualified people should be able to get elected in order to govern the place, to govern all of Haiti. So these urban kind of business elites are highly educated. They don't really want to trust the army because the army is often led and controlled by officers that are not so much educated and have more loyalty with the other side of the kind of city leaders, which are the black workforce in general. So the urban mulattoes will largely try to ignore any kind of racial differences amongst Haitians. They'll talk about the big differences amongst Haitians as based in education or integrity or morality or something like that, but they don't want to talk about race, largely because they're the lighter skinned ones that are the business elite that are controlling the place. So they don't want to talk about how much they have separated themselves from the average black workforce, even in the cities themselves. So there's also another kind of group, which is the average black workforce in the cities, who start demanding more power, more political representation, and whatnot. And they often present themselves as the leader of the average worker, not just in the city, but all throughout the whole country. So they often use a kind of populist message that these business elite who don't want to talk about race, that they are controlling politics and they're kind of oppressing all the rest of the people. And populism is basically saying that the elites in control have run the place badly and you have to get rid of them and bring in some other group to run the place for the benefit of all people equally. The black workers in the cities will often defend the army because a lot of the black workers don't really have much economic opportunity to start businesses themselves and get rich and kind of break into the urban mulatto class. So they often defend the army as the one place for an average worker to join the army and rise through the ranks to become a colonel or a general or something like that. And that would give them some amount of political clout, some amount of political power. And since they're largely building power through the army, the black workers' side often support the idea of authoritarianism because dictators tend to rely on armies to keep themselves in power. So these two sides will kind of argue against each other and eventually solidify into two different major political parties by the 1860s. So the urban mulattoes will call themselves the Liberal Party, and the kind of black workforce with the army behind them will often call themselves the National Party. And we should remember that, power kind of went back and forth amongst them. When the liberals are in power, the nationals try to take power, and that feeds into this kind of instability in Haiti politically that goes into the early 1900s. But a lot of historians point out that even when one group was in power, they still had to rely on the other group to kind of get things done. So, for example, the Liberal Party of the mulatto elites, when they're in power, they have to rely on the black army to kind of defend the country. And when the National Party is in power, they have to rely on the educated mulattoes from the Liberal Party to kind of run the bureaucracy, to do the tax collecting or canal building or something like that, because that requires advanced mathematics and planning and whatnot, and that's what the educated bureaucracy tends to do in almost any country. And a lot of historians point out that both the National Party and the Liberal Party, if they're trying to take or keep power, they will often look to make deals with foreign countries to accomplish that, to stay in power or to get into power. So both sides, both the Liberals and the Nationals, will try to make alliances or some kind of deals with Britain or France up through the 1840s, or especially after Germany becomes a kind of unified country in the 1870s. They will try to appeal to Germany to help them on one side or the other. Sometimes even ask the United States political parties if they're willing to get involved, send money or something to keep one or these other groups in power. So again, they're doing everything they can possibly think of to retain control over the government. And of course, again, it's a very unstable political era until about 1915 or so. And we'll talk about what happens after 1950, after the first test. All right, and that sends us into talking about Cuba in the 1800s. Cuba was also a Spanish colony going all the way back to the early 1500s. If you just look at the map here, Cuba is obviously the biggest of the islands out in the Caribbean Sea. So Cuba was immediately seen as a place to for the Spanish to colonize and build up their colonial government, and start launching explorations of all these other places and to try to conquer those places. So Cuba was like the central government hub for the Spanish Empire in the Caribbean for many, many years. And when the Spanish colonized Cuba, they basically went genocidal against the natives that were living on the island when they arrived. And so they basically wiped out most of the natives, to the point, either through warfare or disease, to the point where when they needed a workforce, the natives were dying off in such huge numbers from European diseases that the Spanish started bringing in African slaves into Cuba to do the manual labor to keep the colony alive. The Cuban population and economy was mostly based on sugar production from a fairly early point, and that continued well into the 1800s. The problem, though, is that Spain's colonial policies on trade did a lot of economic damage, as they did throughout most of Latin America. So Cuba was a sugar-producing island. It was pretty prosperous, but Spanish kind of misgovernment of the place did a lot of damage. Coffee will start to also be grown in Cuba in the 1800s, and also tobacco. So tobacco will generally take over the Cuban economy by the mid 1800s. So that's a big, big change in Cuban history. And even today, Cuban tobacco and cigars are seen as like some of the best sources in the world. So that becomes their kind of expert thing that they grow and export, even by the mid 1800s, going into the late 1800s. Um, when the Latin American revolutions broke out around 1810 or so, depending on exactly which area you're talking about, the people governing Cuba, the Spanish colonists, largely decided to stay loyal to Spain. And most historians argue that that's because they feared that if they also declared independence, they had so many slaves in Cuba that there might be a slave uprising similar to the Haitian Revolution. The Cuban leaders, decided to play it safe and just remain a part of the Spanish Empire, hoping that the Spanish government would be able to stop any possible rising up of slaves in Cuba and any kind of revolutionary attempt. So they didn't want to get involved in any revolutionary stuff because they didn't want to, open that can of worms, and possibly lead to a fully, slave revolt against them that might destroy them the way it destroyed the French landowners in Haiti. So Cuba stays loyal to Spain throughout this era of revolution up until about 1830 or so, when all these other Latin American countries are declaring and winning their independence. So it's really Cuba and Puerto Rico, which are the two kind of last Spanish colonies in the Caribbean after 1830 or so. And again, by 1830, sugar is still the main staple crop of Cuba, and it relies on slavery to be productive. So slavery and sugar just absolutely boomed in Cuba after all those Latin American wars ended in the 1820s, around going up to about 1830. So it is estimated that Cuba produced somewhere around 1/3 of the world's sugar supply, and kept growing by 1860. And that Cuba just kept on importing more and more African slaves right into the mid 1860s. So there's well over 500,000 African slaves in Cuba by about 1860, 1865. So Cuba was another one of these kind of cash crop, slave-based, plantation type of societies, and that was the kind of central core piece of their economy. So going into the 1860s, there is a early attempt at a Cuban revolution against the Spanish Empire. This revolution takes 10 years to be defeated, so the Spanish sent in armies into Cuba and were eventually able to destroy this first Cuban revolutionary attempt, the first Cuban revolt, as it's often called. Largely because the Cuban revolt spread to be a multiracial and cross-class rebellion. It wasn't just it started off among the big landowners who wanted independence from Spain for one reason or the other, but it also spread to the common workforce who were largely slaves. So there is this large kind of revolutionary sentiment, but it did fail, and eventually the Spanish were able to basically reconquer and recontrol the island within 10 years by about 1878 or so. And in 1878, once the first revolt ended, especially U.S.-based investors will start going into Cuba and starting businesses and buying up plantations. And the United States even tried to buy Cuba in the 1850s. Buy it straight out from Spain and make Cuba part of the United States. So there was some attempt at that, but Spain refused to sell, obviously, because they wanted to keep their colony. So the revolt ended in 1878, but the demand to end slavery and the talk of ending slavery kept going after that, and eventually pushed the colonial government to abolish slavery in 1886 and get the Spanish government's permission to do so. And that's a big step forward because the Cuban economy was so reliant on slavery up till that point that it was shocking when they did get rid of slavery. And Cuba is one of the last Latin American countries to get rid of slavery by 1886. The absolute last one to do so is Brazil, which again is another sugar producing, slavery reliant country in the 1800s. So Cuba and Brazil are the last areas in Latin America to get rid of slavery. And that still won't stop future revolutions from breaking out in the mid 1890s, but again, we'll get to Cuba's further development later as we go into the 1900s. So we'll stop here for today, and we'll continue our tour of Latin American areas as we continue to move on to talking about Western South America, the Andean civilizations, or the Andean countries that break away, and we'll talk about their development in the 1800s next time.